I am really curious as to how long the development cycle for Tyranny was. This game was announced this year and it came out in what I would consider to be record time. And when you actually plug in the game and start playing it, you realize that it looks a lot like Pillars of Eternity. Suspiciously so. It looks like they just use the same framework and the same engine and they slap new assets on it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. After all, the term Infinity Engine games comes from the reuse of the Infinity engines when making classic RPGs. Nevertheless, while it does kind of feel like a cash grab of sorts, it is interesting to see that the time that Obsidian didn't have to spend making a new engine and working out new mechanics, they spent on making a world that's interesting, fun to playing, and probably one of the most reactive RPGs that I have remember playing in the past few years. Tyranny takes place in the world of Taratus, where the ancient evil Kairos, an immortal dictator god that's essentially every super spooky evil villain from fantasy novels, is about to take over the whole world. There's only one region that's still not under his control, the Tiers, and he is marching into it now. So as the game begins, you have a lot of choices to make. Not only do you have to choose your character, your background, and your class, but you will also be tasked with choosing what happened to your character during the early day of the Conquest of the Tiers in the Conquest mode. So the Conquest of the Tier takes 4 years, and the first 3 years are covering the Conquest, where you will choose what your character did during those 3 years in a type of choose your own adventure style of text adventure. These choices that you make will have long-lasting effects through whole campaign, and I really like what they did here, because what it does is it gives your character some baggage that will affect all of their interactions coming into the game, and it makes them feel like they are more than just a blank slate onto which you project your personality. You make all of the choices, however, it still feels like you are carrying that baggage in your interactions with the different factions of the game. So after Conquest mode, you are given a task of reading an edict. So Kairos uses this super powerful beings called Archons to protect his will. You are in the service of the Archon of Justice called Tunon. You are a Fatebinder, which is really a traveling judge, arbiter style legal clerk. Just when the Conquest of the Tier seems to be wrapping up, a rebellion erupts, and the two armies, the Scarlet Chorus and the Disfavor, cannot agree on how to approach the battle. Losing his patience, Tunon sends you with this edict, a very powerful piece of magic that essentially says that if the rebellion is not quelled within a certain period of time, then everybody in that valley will die. So you start the game as a politician, a diplomat trying to make these two armies work with each other. And as the game progresses, you will start gaining importance and making choices that will really affect how all of the factions see you and how they react to you. This game has probably the best faction play since Fallout New Vegas. The game tracks your decisions for what I consider to be a surprisingly long amount of time, and it tracks a lot of those decisions, as well as your reputation with many factions. Not only the factions of the two invading armies commanded by Kairos, but also the factions that are in the Tiers, including the Beast Folk, which are a separate race, and even the army of your opponents. What this means is that you will eventually have to make choices that will make some factions completely turn on you and others to ally with you, and this results in a schism where some sections of the game will be close to you regardless of what you choose. Some factions have their own quests, some factions will have you go to their own separate areas, and while not all of the faction and all of the paths will have unique missions, there's enough content here that will probably take you about 2 full playthroughs in order to see most of the game. It is a bit like The Witcher 2, where depending on your choices that you made, Chapter 2 was a completely different experience. As the game progresses, you will start unlocking ancient artifacts and places of power, as well as absorbing some really powerful magic. And this ties into the leveling system of the game, which is one of the things that I like the best. Mechanically, the game is very similar to Pillars of Eternity, however, the leveling system is a bit different. The way that leveling works in Tyranny is that you will get points to skills that you use often. So If you are doing a lot of conversation and a lot of sweet talking and ingenuity, then those skills will go up. If you use a sword, then your sword skill will go up. It's a very organic way of handling character progression. So for example, my character started as a straight up mage, but by the end of the game she was some sort of diplomatic mage that also wore heavy armor and fought like a Bronze Age skirmisher. And it is a lot of fun to experiment with this. I believe there's a lot of builds that you can do, and a lot of it will have to do with how you choose to play the game. So not only will the builds affect the character, but they will also affect how the game is played. Like most Infinity Engine RPGs and like Pillars of Eternity before it, you will probably become overpowered about 3/4 through the game. And that's just something that happens with this type of engine. And this is something that I kind of liked. It is very easy as a critic to fall into the trap of trying to guess authorial intent. Sometimes something might happen just as a happy accident, but you assume that it's on purpose. So I don't know if this was on purpose or not, but the fact that you become so overpowered means that whereas at the beginning of the game you were struggling to kill a naked guy with a rusted spoon, towards the end of the game you will be just stomping through the elite forces of these armies and killing some of the most powerful men in the game, and it is a great feeling. Unfortunately, you will notice that a lot because there's just not variety in the combat. There are 3 different types of encounters in Tyranny, not counting the bosses, and these are just regular humans, the aforementioned beast folk, which are their own faction, and let's just call them ghosts. The game has their own name for them, but that's exactly what they are. They are incorporeal beings that haunt ruins. 95% or maybe even more of those encounters will be against other humans, and it gets all really fast. The Infinity Engine wasn't built for this kind of combat. It was built to have you fight a huge dragon on an active volcano, or to go into the depth of the underworld and defeat Demogorgon, Prince of all demons. If you've been playing strategy RPGs since the heyday of the isometric RPG in the 90s, then you've been playing some of the best games in the genre. You've been playing Final Fantasy Tactics, you played XCOM. Even more recently, you probably played Wasteland 2, which has the hybrid RPG style with the strategy RPG combat, and all of those do this kind of combat against other human beings better. It's not that the combat is bad, it's just that it gets all really, really fast. And I wonder if Tyranny had more time of development, whether we could have gotten some more variety in the encounter types. Another part of the game where it feels that there was just not enough time is in some of the quests. So a lot of the quests have a lot of reactivity and a lot of choice built into them, including being able to completely betray whatever faction you're working for, which can have some very deep consequences to the game. Unfortunately, not all of them do, and when they don't, you really can tell. You really feel the absence of that feature in the game. For example, towards the end of the game, I was tasked with a quest that I just did not agree with. Not because of very moral qualms, but because as a pragmatist, I felt that that quest would actually hurt me more in the long run than it would help me. So I decided that I was going to try to undermine it, and if I could, betray the person that gave me the quest. Except that choice never came. What ended up happening was that it was telegraphed, and they even told you need to do this exact same way or everything will be wasted. But the choice of betraying it just never came, and I have to wonder whether that choice was not built in due to a time constraint or if it was just designed that way. But it feels really, really jarring to not be able to have a choice in that specific instance when there is so much choice built into things that seem to be comparatively less important. But perhaps the most egregious example of type crunch is the ending of this game. To put it bluntly, this game can be called sequel bait. It does end the arc, but it presents a situation where the characters just tell you, oh well, the battle has just begun, instead of finishing the game in a more concise manner. It is very similar to what you would have seen in Deus Ex Mankind Divided earlier this year, or to put a more recognizable example, a bit like the ending of Star Wars A New Hope. It does wrap up the story of the particular chapter that you are playing, however you know that there is unfinished business and there is more to come. This might have been mitigated a little bit if it wasn't because the game is 30 hours long, which is very short for this type of game. I don't necessarily have a problem with a shorter runtime. I believe that what Obsidian has done here is that they've traded a long game for a game that has more choice and deeper mechanics and more meaningful consequences. However, if you are the kind of person that will just play a game once and then forget about it, and you are not necessarily aware that there are different choices and different paths that this game could have taken, I can understand that you will be disappointed. I know that this sounds fairly negative, however, I do believe that these are smaller complaints on what it is really one of the best RPGs of the year. If you are at all into RPGs and you want something that can make you feel like your choices matter and has a lot of reactivity and remembers a lot of what you've done before, then I can recommend this game wholeheartedly. Even if you're a fan of RPGs and are scared of the price tag, which I understand is a problem because this game is about $45, a bit steep for a 30-hour Infinity Engine game. However, I do recommend that you at least pick it up on a sale, and I'm giving this one a 4 out of 5. Thank you for listening. You can see more at enemyslime.com. You can also send us your death threats at the Enemy Slime on Twitter. Follow us on Facebook and question our manhood at also the Enemy Slime, and you can of course send me things about our mothers by emailing us at contact@enemyslime.com. Have a good day.